The chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Give thanks to Almighty God for this opportunity to once again be in the Parliament of the Bahamas and to say how grateful I am to the residents of Marco City for their consistent support. Madam Speaker, I wish to, during this difficult time, extend condolences to several families that some have laid their loved ones to rest, others are in the process of doing so. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to pay homage to and remember Colin Edgecombe and to say to the entire family how much we pray for you and our thoughts go out to you during this difficult time, especially Cordero. Madam Speaker, we also wish to remember Rudolph Rigby and to say to Matisse, one of our incredible creatives in the Bahamas, how much we grieve with you, and to the relatives of Selena Roll, and especially to Edna, how much we are praying for you. And to the family of Willard Martin and Eunice Cox Munnings, to say to Brigida and to Mrs. Cox Forbes how much we are praying for you, and to the relatives of Francois Burrows and Charles Dickerson, to let them know that we are praying for them and their family. And Madam Speaker, our heart goes out to Mrs. Mortimer, Chris' mother, who has lost in a very short time 2 of her sons. It is a very difficult time for Mrs. Mortimer and the rest of the family to first lose Chris and then to lose his younger brother a short time thereafter. We know that God has the ability to heal the broken heart and to provide comfort in the midst of sorrow. Madam Speaker, we expected on this side to have a question and answer period, which the leader of opposition business has ably laid out the case, that this is not a courtesy, as was suggested by the Prime Minister in previous debates. This is an entitlement. Madam Speaker, we have chosen on this occasion to use this time to still put those questions on the public record, but we do encourage the government to honor this entitlement and let us have on a regular basis question and answer period, and then to provide full and candid answers to the questions. Madam Speaker, I brought with me the list of the answers that have been provided, and we have gone through the tedious task of noting questions that were inadequately answered, or in some cases, ministers saying we'll get back to you and fail to do so. Madam Speaker, it is relevant if previous administrations have not answered questions, inclusive of the administration I was proud to be a part of. But we are in opposition. So if that may be a part of the pronouncement of a verdict by the public. You are in the chair now, and you have an obligation to consistently answer the questions being raised and to do so in a candid and frank manner. Madam Speaker, one of the questions that we asked related, Madam Speaker, to the issue of the $150 million arrears. And we asked the Minister of Works, who's responsible for BPL, or the Prime Minister, to help us understand the breakdown of these arrears. We got no answer. We went on, Madam Speaker, after it was revealed in a report that the government made a loan to BPL. We asked by what authority was $110 million transferred to BPL. Madam Speaker, we were not trying to be cute or salacious when we said it was a misappropriation of funds. Madam Speaker, we were essentially referencing the Constitution itself of the Bahamas, which made the point that if central government is minded to make a loan available to a government corporation, it must be done out of particular appropriations. And that's why we come during the budget cycle or through a supplemental budget in order to execute these kinds of arrangements. Or if funds were already in a particular area, that you can then, through finance, you can then wire funds to another location. So we were not being cute when we charged this administration of misappropriation. In other words, in an inappropriate manner, moving funds to a corporation not appropriately authorized to do so, Madam Speaker. And we only discovered that $110 million was made available to BPL when it showed up in a report, and then a senior member of finance, when questioned about it, identified BPL as the agency. We've said it before, and we have numerous examples. This administration only partially fesses up once discovered. Once discovered. There's one rule for the Davis-Cooper administration, and there's a different rule for the rest of the public. So that was one of the questions we asked. And this is why we ask these questions, because you discover things when you put questions to the government and they candidly answer. And very seldom does this administration do that. We also ask of the minister with responsibility for the public service and foreign affairs if he would advise the House on the number of retired public officers who return to work. And are these public officers receiving full pension and pay? What is the quantum? What is the total amount that's being paid? We value our senior public servants who have retired, and many of them still have a contribution to make in different ways. But let's be transparent about what we're doing, and then also let's do it in a way that does not disadvantage persons who reasonably expect to be promoted in these ministries, only to have to wait another 5 years for an opportunity to move up when they are entitled to do so. We have far too many people living on the time of others whose time has come. That's why we must resist people who have gone past the period of time when they ought to occupy a position and still fighting for it, or others facilitating them to get there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we also ask, will the Honorable Minister advise the House on the number of envoys this administration has added, and are all of these envoys paid, Madam Speaker? We have not gotten the complete details. It was asked by a member on our side, and we still have not gotten all of the details with respect.
That's the question to Minister Mitchell. It's not been placed.
Yes. Well, yes, it's in the document, and these are the questions we were going to ask. And if the minister is going to be absent, he has one of the most competent ministers in your administration is in that ministry, is the Minister of State, and should be authorized to answer it. You are one administration, though you continue to demonstrate that you do not speak with one voice. I would say at all. Well, very seldom you do. We also will ask, will the Honourable Minister advise the Honourable House on the amount of Foreign Services officers, attachés, and other staff members this administration has posted, and where have they been posted? Madam Speaker, we have also asked of the Prime Minister, will the Honourable Prime Minister advise this Honourable House of the terms of engagement for the consulting firm McKinsey & Company? And what procurement process was used to engage this firm? How many bids were received? What is the value of the contract, and how much has been spent to date? Madam Speaker, we have asked numerous questions. This is not an administration that is prepared to be transparent. Yet it is an administration that is prepared to talk about transparency and accountability, but refuse to demonstrate it in their action. That's why this administration has entered into numerous confidential, they call it, the appropriate term is secret settlements with a number of persons who felt aggrieved by the administration that I served in. And Madam Speaker, we don't have any difficulty. We've said it before in here, that if somebody was unceremoniously transferred to a different location, but they didn't lose any income, They didn't lose any benefits. They possibly suffered embarrassment. Yeah, yes, there's a price for that, no doubt. But when you do not reveal what the quantum is that you're paying, you have hung a cloud over the heads of these officers, these senior persons who may otherwise be doing the right thing every day. But one has to ask the question, how much was given? Was it beyond what is ordinarily given in other jurisdictions that then raises questions about what is all that extra money for? And this is what this administration has done to public servants. Put a cloud over their head because of the secrecy within which you operate. The secrecy also is extended to all of the contracts, many of the contracts that have been signed. What are you hiding? Why is it a problem that you're unable to publish the hundreds of contracts, the hundreds of millions of dollars you are spending of the people's money, not your money, the people's money? How difficult could it be to simply reveal who you are entering into an agreement with? What are the terms of the contract? What is the duration of the contract? Unfortunately, this is an administration that talks about accountability and transparency, but in your consistent action, you demonstrate you have no commitment to do so. Under my administration, we will behave different than you. We will not only be an improvement on you, we will be an improvement on what we were as well. Because every government ought to be an improvement on its predecessor. And that's why when I heard the member for Angleton speak, I don't disagree with the member for Angleton. BPL has some legacy issues. However, it does not disqualify us from being able to make concrete recommendations on the way forward and to critique the government that's in the chair when it fails to live up to its own promises. In the blueprint in the blueprint for change that you have, you said within 100 days, you would evaluate all that is happening with BPL. You will set it on a course to lower electricity rate. You talk about increasing in a dramatic way the complement or the portion of our energy mix that comes from renewals. So you had a long list of things you intended to do relative to the energy space. The biggest one in our mind is you promised to come up with a comprehensive plan to take BPL forward. So we are within our rights, notwithstanding any shortcomings and failings that we would have had in the energy space. We are within our rights to now critique you and to raise questions about your stewardship. And one, you have refused to come up with a comprehensive plan with respect to the development of BPL and the transformation of the energy sector. You failed. Absolutely. 20 months later. And your board could not come up with, the minister could not come up with, the minister of finance could not come up with a comprehensive plan with respect to BPL. You failed. You failed to protect Bahamian consumers and Bahamian businesses that tell you that the cost of electricity is an albatross around their necks. So what have you done? You've gotten recommendations on a hedge program which you refused to follow, and when you realized the mistake was massive, you then lied about it. The minister, in 11 minutes and 11 seconds, he had 8 times he stood on his feet in this house and misled the Parliament of the Bahamas that he did not receive the advice, when in essence he did receive the advice. He told an untruth. I think they are synonyms, but I take your point. And so the bottom line is 8 times in less than 11 minutes and 11 seconds, 8 times misled this house. Again, the mistake was already made, did not take the advice, but then sought to cover up the fact. And what was the result? The result is this public, the residents in Mason's Addition, or in Key West Street where I grew up, or 7th Street where I grew up, or Jenny Street, or Melbourne Road in Yellow Elder, all of them experience a 163% increase in fuel charge because of the mistake of this administration, and then the added sin of seeking to conceal it. So when you talk about legacy problems, you're right. We met a legacy problem, and we saw through a rate reduction bond to address it. We failed to fully execute it. We failed to execute it. The same rate reduction bond that the present prime minister, when he was in the chair, had an interest in introducing. It was developed, refined by a board that was put in place, and it had the potential to help us raise the $500+ million to retire the legacy debt, to re-engineer, to change the infrastructure, to train the staff. And we didn't pull the trigger on it. You came in, got advice while interest rates were low enough in the international market to make it worthwhile, and again missed an opportunity. So what we are experiencing today is not merely a result of legacy problems, because in 2021, summer that was hot like this one, there were no blackouts and load shedding that you're experiencing now. Right now in Eleuthera, people are having tremendous problems. Ask the member for Central and South Eleuthera. Today, electricity as well as water.
The chair
We're
recognizes
talking about
the
energy.
honourable
You're
member
struggling with education and
for
the Department of Energy.
Yamacraw.
Sorry, the time.
I would like to bring attention to the article, the Tribune says BPL is failing its customers. Tuesday, July 27, 2021. And it starts, it's summer and power is going out. It's a similar occurrence, it goes on, says a similar occurrence, and one that prompted Bahamas Power and Light officials yesterday to ask for customers to bear with the company. It goes on to say what the chairman would have said, and it says
What was the month you said?
July 2021. For starters, the company could be more transparent and about the problems they are having and the dialogue with customers. And it says yesterday, Dr. Moxie said that the problem wasn't load shedding, which BPL had pledged had come to an end, that it was transmission and distribution event going on to a point, a lack of funding and for infrastructure upgrades. Meanwhile, the union president said that maintenance issues were the cause of outages. And they asked, well, which is it? It goes on to say that you can say that it seems that as they solve one problem, that only runs into another problem, and it ends with, so come clean, BPL, tell us everything, and not just vague terms, and respect your customers enough to keep them updated. There's also part of the article which speaks to numerous calls, complaints, and no updates, silence from the other side on the issues of mass outages. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Thank you.
If you can lay the document for me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the parliamentary secretary, would you permit me to speak, young man? No. Would you permit me to speak, please? Thank you very. I appreciate you. The member for South Beach. Madam Speaker, the member for South Beach indicated that we had a historical problem that was plaguing BPL, and that the problem the Minnis administration had was the inability for generation to meet the demand. What he cited, Madam Speaker, does not speak to that particular point. There was not an issue of the ability to generate power. We had capacity, Madam Speaker. You can have, let me finish the point. You can have outages, as he said, with a fire. You can have outages because somebody hits a pole. But this was not an issue of that we did not have the capacity to generate power. And the article does not speak to us lacking the capacity to generate power. That was the point. That was the point that was made. So again, what I'm saying to you is that the outages that occurred, if you can lay an article that simply says that the government did not have the capacity to withdraw, no problem, I'd have no problems withdrawing that. We did have serious issues in BPL, but I identify the ones you are responsible for. You are responsible for the $110 million right now that the government illegally funneled to BPL because you made a mistake not to take advice on the hedging. And that is the issue, Madam Speaker. We raise, Madam Speaker, a number of questions in this House we expecting the government to answer. Madam Speaker, a second issue of great importance to us, and by the way, not only Lutra is having problems with outages, Auckland's Michael, in fact, our heart went out to the Member of Parliament for Michael. He had one of the most sobering presentations during the budget, appealing to his colleagues not to neglect his island and to make the requisite investments after they've taken large entourages to visit and inspect. What he wanted was results, Madam Speaker. So on multiple islands, we are having issues with outages. The second issue, Madam Speaker, I want to rush to real quick. So let me just button this up by saying you have an opportunity to learn from any mistakes we may have made and mistakes the PLP in its previous iteration made. And so you ought to come up with a comprehensive plan. You ought to empower persons in Andros, have a group of Bahamians with whoever strategic partner they have, who can, in fact, through renewables, provide power not just to Andros, but to various keys and family islands. Let's empower Bahamians. Let's create a society of ownership by allowing them at the generation level, not through distribution and transmission. The government has a fair amount of infrastructure in place, but at the generation level, we have an opportunity. $20 million is a minuscule but important step, but $20 million, maximum 5 megawatts for what he's talking about, huh? Okay, so we have a chance to do something different in terms of empowering Bahamians, and the Family Island gives us the best opportunity to do so. We also need to, in this comprehensive plan, is make sure that BPL is not the agency that has veto power to determine the level of self-generation by individuals or companies. How could you have the competitor adjudicating who gets the authority to enter into the space that they already dominate as a monopoly? So I believe we have an opportunity to do something substantially different. And so I say even to the Minister of Agriculture and Education, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to take agriculture, or all of the agriculture and education facilities off the grid and make that a particular renewable energy project. So I'll stop there. I want to move very quickly, Madam Speaker, with the limited time we have, to the issue of immigration. We call on the government to establish a select committee on immigration to look at all things related to immigration. Not just illegal migration, but also positive migration. We live in Grand Bahama that has a small population that can benefit from a growth in population. But if we are to welcome persons from elsewhere in the Bahamas or people from overseas, it should be on Bahamian terms, that you come in the right way through the front door, and you do not displace Bahamians at the white or blue-collar level, that you have a coherent, organized, predictable program, carefully advertised and administered. So that's two of a multiplicity of numerous suggestions we made. This government failed to accept the establishment of a select committee that would involve not only all of you who show up every day to work, but many Bahamians who wish to contribute their ideas to how we can solve this vexing legacy problem. Now you've done something else. You have damaged your own credibility through your minister with responsibility for immigration in the callous fashion in which he dispenses citizenship. In fact, this is not new for you. Within the first week of coming to office, there were some Asians who were apprehended. And this administration, your administration, was responsible for their release. Recently, we understand that you have at least 100 persons from the Far East who are working in a hotel whose deadline we are unclear of, and we wish to ask the member for Exuma, when will the British Colonial Hotel open? But it's our understanding, and we wish to find out, is it accurate that you have 100 persons without work permits working in British Colonial Hotel, and when they were apprehended by immigration, they were ordered by no less than the minister to release them? Is this accurate, and is there any member who is willing to stand and explain whether this is accurate, and on what basis would they have been released? We are a country of laws. This is a country of laws. And so what the government is doing is on one of the most sensitive issues, you are eroding your own credibility, and a public that's already cynical about all administrations, you are cementing their view that you are not working on behalf of the Bahamian people. Madam Speaker, there's a lot more to be said on that. But what we believe is that the way in which you are approaching the granting of citizenship and work permits and permanent residence is to gain political advantage rather than to clear out a backlog that has existed for people who have legitimate applications. Because the question is, if you wish to clear out the backlog, where is the board? Where's the board that was in place, that was dismantled? Have you put in place a new immigration board? And does the director have a chance to sit as the secretary as they ought to when they meet with the immigration board or with cabinet? This government is eroding its credibility as it relates to its willingness to address the vexing issue of immigration. While we were in the budget debate, houses were still being built in communities that the government claims it will dismantle. Well, for God's sake, if you plan to dismantle at some point, would it not make sense for us to make sure no new buildings are being built? And this is not new. It's a cry that some of us made while we sat in the chair. Let's stop what's happening right now, while we seek to deal in the future with dismantling irregular developments. Madam Speaker, this country has an opportunity to build a society that is merit-based, where Bahamians who are overseas would be willing to come home if they believe they have a legitimate shot of sharing in the bounty of this country, where if they believe they have an opportunity to get a job on the basis of their qualification rather than on the basis of their connections. A part of the reason we have tremendous difficulty with this government seeking to expand its influence, even in Freeport, I'm going to close by talking about Freeport, is that we are so tribalistic in our nature that even getting jobs, grants, these grants from Small Business Development Center, et cetera, is so politicized that a select group of people have access to resources while others don't. And it's a problem. And so persons who believe that once they apply right now, despite the dysfunction of GBPA, and it is in many ways dysfunctional, I can tell you the average Grand Bahamian believes you put that in the hand of central government. Politics will determine how fast things move, who gets their permit approved, which businesses are approved. That is a non-starter, a non-negotiable for the people of Freeport. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity to create, for the next 50 years, a different type of society. This administration has to get off this business of simply pointing out what was wrong. You have in place leadership that has accepted that we have not governed perfectly and is prepared to work where necessary in a bipartisan way to move this country forward. What we do not see is a government that is willing to do the same. It's your way or the highway. There's a different rule for you and a different rule for everybody else. You go to Bermuda using public funds. And only when it was discovered did you admit, and then you say you paid it back and gave no evidence that the money has been paid. Refuse to lay one single document on the table of the House. People are going to jail under your administration for moving funds. The question is, how do you get to do it and there are no consequences for this administration? Madam Speaker, there's one rule for the Davis-led administration, and there is a different rule for the rest of the Bahamas. Time? Madam Speaker, there are many questions this government has to answer. I've outlined a number of them in the area of immigration, Madam Speaker. But the Ministry of Finance also has a number of questions to answer. We're still looking for an answer on how is it that a government can borrow funds from the central bank, then come to Parliament, make a decision to make it retroactive to cover the transgression they made earlier to borrow $174 million, which is the equivalent of 232 million special drawing rights. One rule for the Davis administration and a different rule for everybody else. Madam Speaker, I wish to close just by referencing briefly the situation in Grand Bahama. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. The people of Grand Bahama, in particular the licensees, and I've been a licensee in recent years of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, we do not believe that the Grand Bahama Port Authority is functioning in the most effective manner that is in the best interest of Freeport and by extension the rest of Grand Bahama. And it is the rest of Grand Bahama because they are responsible for regulating even the electricity company that's responsible for East and West Grand Bahama. So we don't believe that the regulatory functions should be in the hands of two private families. There should be an entity, but that entity ought to be controlled by the licensees of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, of Grand Bahama and Freeport, rather than by two families. We also do not believe that the big players ought to have a free ride at 5 or not having to pay. They could sit on land indefinitely, not pay anything, but I'm paying service charge as many other persons are paying service charge. We have to reconfigure that arrangement. We do not believe that those fees that are being paid into that fund ought to be narrowly controlled by shareholders. But the licensees themselves ought to be members of a special purpose vehicle created to control those funds. But we also do not believe that central government should be making statements that create uncertainty in the domestic and international market about the future of Grand Bahama without doing the sensible thing, which is to sit down with the opposition, to sit down with the licensees, including the industrials, to sit down with DevCo and GBPA and talk about and discuss the way forward. Madam Speaker, so important is the future of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and GBPA that we should convene a session of Parliament to have a discussion about the way forward. We should be in Grand Bahama meeting with all the stakeholders. And I believe the member for Western and Bimini, you must be saying this to your cabinet colleagues. Because it is not right what the Prime Minister has done in creating uncertainty about some strong action they're going to take without defining what the action is. Which investor in his right mind is going to deposit money into an uncertain environment? It was uncertain when the two shareholder families were fighting each other. It is uncertain under the Davis-Cooper administration today. And we will resist anything other than having a sensible, reasonable conversation with all stakeholders about the way forward for Freeport in particular and Grand Bahama in general. And we cannot have GBPA regulating itself, regulating companies that, and I agree, Hawksbill Creek Agreement does not make provision for IRCA to be regulating the agencies that they wish to regulate in Grand Bahama. But nor should GBPA regulate the utility company that is a revenue generator for the company as well. There should be Bahamian ownership in any future configuration of a GBPA or the Port Group Limited group of companies. Bahamians should share in the bounty. But should this administration take over all regulatory functions? I think it's H to the double hockey stick, no. No, this administration should not take over. Okay, H-E. H-E to the double hockey stick. Should not be. And so, it's unparliamentary spelling, but I stand by it. And so, Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity to do something different. And it is my hope that this administration would discontinue squandering the opportunity to set a new direction for this country. Don't brag about what you're doing in terms of natural resources and refuse to pause and explain the Sovereign Wealth Fund and how the benefits from the various resources will ultimately benefit the Bahamian people. We are unprepared as an administration to have that discussion with the Bahamian people. We missed an opportunity when we were in office. You are doing the very same thing, missing an opportunity. When it's simple, that you ought to put forth a robust piece of legislation based on best practices internationally in setting up Sovereign Wealth Fund, ensure that every one of the natural resources, and there are many, that funds go into it, and they go into that special purpose vehicle for particular reasons to keep the money from being just in the consolidated fund that you could spend any way you decide. And so, Madam Speaker, with those few words, I wish to say that we will support Anglican. All of our team members will support this bill. And however, we say, as I reiterate what St. Anne said at the beginning, that while this is important, he could identify numerous other bills that were substantially more important. That's the point that he made, and we stand with him in that regard. There are other things. Child protection could have been here. Ombudsman could have been here. And so, again, we support this, but we want this government to prioritize its time to deal with the vexing issues that affect Bahamian people now that the pomp and pageantry has calmed down and the partying has paused, if only for a moment. We have an opportunity. Oh, I enjoyed the time I spent with my wife. God is so good. And so we implore this government to get on with the serious business of building a Bahamas that's fairer for all Bahamians, not just PLPs. To build a Bahamas that is committed to getting Bahamians who are from overseas to contribute to this country because you're making them feel welcome and valued, and they believe that they have a place coming back home, and they don't have to be yellow in order to get a job or to advance, or to have their matters settled that has been outstanding for years. Madam Speaker, Marco City and the Free National Movement supports this resolution.
Thank you, Honourable Member.